Governor Cuomo's put out a budget that really puts the millionaires over the middle and working class, and that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us at all. We need to do something about that. And today, we're going to learn how we came to this in the first place and learn how to combat that. So without further ado, bring up Michael Kink. He's the Executive Director for Strong Economy for All. So
thanks for guiding us in here. We've been going around the whole state talking about inequality, talking about this year's budget, talking about how Albany in particular, but government in general, has been working over the last 30 years to make inequality worse, not better, and about how we have a chance to turn it around starting now. I see we have a chicken little, there we go. Come on. Come on. All right. New York has the worst income inequality in the country. We have the biggest division between the rich and the poor than anywhere else in the United States. Now, the United States is the most unequal country in the developed world, and New York is the most unequal place in the United States. This is not just a slogan, this is facts, right? Back when Mario Cuomo was governor, we had some rich people and some poor people and some middle class people. But now, when Mario Cuomo was governor, we have this skyrocketing income. This is yearly income. This is not money in the bank. This is not stocks and bonds in your house. This is every single year. The top 1% averages almost $2 million a year, right? Used to be 400,000. This is inflation adjusted. This is the same dollars. This isn't like, playing numbers games. So in the last 30 years, the income of the top 1% has gone up 368%. So if there's 10 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Out of 10 of us, one of you, your income has gone up 368%. Now the bottom half, the 5 of you right there, your income has actually gone down, right? 16%. This is the facts that everybody lives, but it's also the statistics, the economic reality. Child poverty is horrible. It's horrible in the Bronx, and I know, the Bronx has been dealing with this for a long time. But it's horrible everywhere in the state. Upstate, 50% of kids, every other kid in these upstate cities is living in poverty, right? We have record high homelessness here in New York City. There are many areas, including rural areas of New York, that have record levels of homelessness. So the economy is driving part of this. We are only growing low-wage jobs. It's the only area where we're creating jobs is low wages. We are losing high-wage jobs. We are losing medium-wage jobs. The only area where we're growing is low-wage jobs. That's what we're getting from the current economy, the current politics that we have. And the question is, how do we get here? It's not because people like us in a room like this, in a neighborhood like this, figured out the right policies for going forward. It was Wall Street, it was the 1%, it was the specific interests, whether you call them conservatives, whether you call them business interests, both parties, they had a specific plan to carry out over the last 30 years. They wanted to cut taxes for rich people. They wanted to cut government's budgets and services. They wanted to increase corporate welfare, the subsidies that we give to big corporations. They wanted to make sure that the profits from businesses went more to the CEOs and the executives and less to workers, right? That was a specific plan. You can look at the think tank reports, you can look at the academic studies. They got what they wanted in New York. We have cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires by 40% in the last 30 years. And you hear all this talk about, taxes are too high and taxes are driving people from New York. If you're a millionaire or a billionaire, your taxes have been cut 40%. Regular people have not seen their taxes be cut like that. If you pay sales tax, you pay income tax, if you own a home and you pay property tax, you haven't gotten those cuts, but the very rich have gotten those cuts. 90,000 public sector jobs lost. We've got CSEA in the House, DC 37 in the House, right? We have been cutting public sector jobs, and that is over the course of just in the last few years since the Wall Street meltdown. We currently spend $7 billion a year in corporate welfare, billion with a B, $7,000 million every year in subsidies to corporations. And what are we getting for that? Right? We're getting that, right? So we're spending $7 billion a year and we're only getting those low-wage jobs. The companies still have high profits. The workers still have strong productivity, right? The companies are earning millions and billions in profits, but the only folks that are getting the pay increases are the CEOs. Regular people, regular workers, their paychecks are flat or down. So it's a big freaking issue, right? Everybody's talking about it. Occupy Wall Street. Bill de Blasio got elected mayor. The Pope is talking about it, right? Obama says it's the defining challenge of our time. There are a lot of leading politicians around the world that are talking about this, but there's one guy who's missing, right? There's one guy who didn't talk about inequality in all of his State of the State speech. There's one guy that didn't talk about inequality in any of his budget presentation, right? If you're in a tale of two cities, the question is which one do you care about? And the fact is that Cuomo, particularly with the budget that he's put out there this year, shows that he stands with Wall Street and the 1% and not with regular New Yorkers. We got all these glaring problems. We have the sky-high poverty. We have the homelessness. We have the income inequality. His number one priority is new tax cuts, targeted specifically at the wealthy, big corporations, and Wall Street. Schools don't have the teachers they need, the programs for kids, counties are struggling to maintain essential services. We have cut the safety net dramatically at this time of all-time record poverty and homelessness, but his plan is to give millionaires and billionaires and bankers a win. It's rough to get personal in politics, but like if you have a budget, it says what you stand for, right? It's like, who are you with? What are you gonna do? It's very, very specific. And this is an election year. Cuomo's up for consideration from the voters. And it looks like what he's doing is providing more for the people that fund his campaigns, more for the elite of New York than for regular New Yorkers. I don't know if you saw, he get 99% of his campaign contributions from donations of $1,000 or more. That's, you know, the governor 1%, governor 99%, it's crazy. So the budget actually makes inequality worse, right? It gives more to the wealthy, and it actually has new budget cuts for everyone else. The crazy thing, the thing that you haven't heard from the papers, and the thing that is not on the TV every night, is that the way they get the money to pay for these new tax cuts is by cutting all this other stuff some more. They're gonna cut the cities and the counties, they're gonna cut the schools, they're gonna cut the homeless shelters and the food pantries and the homeless shelters, to give money to rich people to try to do something about the economy, right? It's the old politics, it's the Reagan politics, it's trickle down, I'm cutting taxes, so I'm gonna create jobs. And the Pope called him out on this, right? The Pope did this big high-profile speech. He talked about trickle-down economics. He said it's a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power. Let us give you $2 billion, and maybe you'll give us some jobs. They haven't done that, right? We have this economy with only low-wage jobs. He's planning $1 billion a year in new tax giveaways to millionaires, billionaires, and Wall Street. We'll talk about the details of those. But there is literally $1 billion on the table that only goes to you if you're a millionaire or a billionaire or a Wall Street bank. That's one pile, $1 billion. The other pile goes to this property tax freeze, which has, you know, a few $1 million for renters in New York City, and a few $100 million for homeowners, mainly the homeowners of the biggest houses in the wealthiest communities with the richest school districts, right? There are other ways to do it. He chose to do it that way. And it's all paid for by budget cuts for everybody else. So we take a closer look, we have this question, you know, does he only care about the wealthy and the well-connected? Does he care about the wealthy? The estate tax cut, right? Inheritance tax, right? I'm not talking about, you know, grandma dying and having a few $1,000s in life insurance, or, you know, some antiques or anything like that. This is estates of over $1 million, and that's after all the deductions and planning, right? They want to cut the estate tax by $750 million a year, $750 million every year, giving it to people that have $1 million only. The bank tax we have now, we have had a dedicated bank tax in New York since 1971. Back when New York City was in fiscal trouble, everybody came together, and the unions came together, and Wall Street came together, and they tried to work out enough money to keep government going. One of the things they did at that point was they put in a dedicated bank tax. We've had it ever since, and Cuomo is proposing to eliminate it. Right now, when bank profits are at an all-time high, when we bailed them out once and then we bailed them out again, when their CEO salaries are higher than they've ever been, this is the time. And it's not like the bank industry is doing poorly, right? It's not like our policies are hurting the banks, right? They're making world record profits and giving world record pay. This is the time that he chooses to eliminate our dedicated bank tax and not do a thing about the $7 billion in corporate welfare. All those tax cuts are funded by $7 billion, a little over $7 billion in new austerity cuts in the next 3 years. So that's on top of all the other cuts that we've had recently, right? If you've lost staff at your job, if your school class sizes are more, if you work at a nonprofit or a homeless shelter, food pantry, if you're trying to, you know, get people into transitional housing, all those kinds of things have been cut and been doing more with less. There are more cuts on the way, specifically so we can take from the poor and give to the rich. We cut the safety net by over $1 billion. We have no way to address child poverty, hunger, and homelessness. All of these cuts in public services, in the safety net, in higher education, those are cutting middle-class jobs. Those are a way to eliminate more middle-class jobs. They are disparately impacting communities of color. There are far more people of color in public sector employment, nonprofit employment, and so all of those cuts from the state shake down to less services for communities, less middle-class jobs, less broad prosperity. So that is his budget. There's no two ways about it. There's a lot of other details. There are one or two good things in his budget that we can talk about later, but overall, when you take the big picture and the big money, his budget is working for the wealthy and for the powerful. There is a different way to do things, right? If you looked at the economy and you looked at a New York that works for all of us, you would stop those tax cuts for the wealthy, and you would try to take specific action to turn New York around from being the worst in the nation on income inequality, right? The same way you got into the ditch, you can get out of the ditch, right? First, you got to stop digging. Stop giving money to rich people. Stop cutting services for middle class and poor and working people, right? So if you want to turn it around, you've got to look at other ways to do things that are more fair and lead to broader prosperity. Fair taxes, better budgets, higher wages, more jobs, educate all children, pass the UPK-NYC plan that de Blasio is fighting for, support the dream for immigrant youth, boost communities of color with specific programs and strong focus for economic development. We can fight poverty, hunger, and homelessness, and we can strengthen democracy. Fair taxes would start by stopping the giveaways to the rich. The freeze that he's proposing, you know, it basically gives someone that owns a $5 million house $2,500, $3,000 a year. Gives somebody that owns a $100,000 house about $30. You know? So the most benefit goes to the richest people in the wealthiest houses. They put a cap. We called it the Ralph Lauren thing, you know, back in December when they first proposed it. We call it Ralph Lauren's law, right? Because he lives in this big estate mansion in Bedford, and you know, the way they originally set it up, you'd be given, you know, $250,000 a year to Ralph Lauren to help him afford the property taxes on his mansion, and you'd be cutting services in the Bronx to pay for that, right? People already buy his clothes and stuff. I have no judgments about that, but we shouldn't take our community's, you know, resources and give them to people like him. So we shamed them into putting a cap of $500,000 a year income on the freeze. But it still targets the most money in the richest people. You could do a thing called a circuit breaker, which is basically saying, if you pay a high proportion of your income in property taxes or rent, we're gonna bring that down. We're either gonna take the bill when it comes, and we're gonna say, instead of you having to pay, $2,000 every 3 months, you're gonna pay $1,000 every 3 months, and we're gonna target the money. There are a lot of people, in working class cities, in upstate, that pay a very large proportion of their income in property tax. There is a real issue with property tax. Obviously, in New York City, there's a problem with rent and affordable housing, right? People can't afford to live. So there are specific ways to target money to the people that are most hard pressed, right? And I get everybody has their household budgets, but when you're doing government policy, you can say, okay, these families make less than 100 grand and have houses that are worth some reasonable amount of money. If you're paying 20% of your income in property taxes, maybe you should get some help. There are 750,000 people in New York that make less than 100 grand that pay 20% of their income in property taxes. So there's certain areas, and this all came from the Republicans too, right? Pataki and Bruno, they cut state income taxes and they pushed the costs onto the counties. It's a whole nother thing. But basically, there are fairer ways to do it. You could have better budgets, right? You could cut that corporate welfare. You could take some of those tax breaks for the rich. You could invest it in schools. You could invest it in infrastructure. You could invest it in local jobs, with local governments, with nonprofits. We could do more clean energy retrofits, public buildings, private housing, right? We could do specific things to fight poverty and homelessness with jobs, with affordable housing, with transitional housing for people that are chronically homeless. There are specific things we could be doing that give a good bang for the buck and that also are more productive, right? One of the things, and we can talk about it a little later, but rich people have only so many places to put their money. And right now, if you give rich people a lot of money, they're gonna buy, Chinese bonds and build factories in China. They're gonna buy really expensive paintings at the auctions and they're going right up. They're gonna buy another pair of, $700 jeans for their teenagers, right? I mean, the luxury consumption is insane, right? So when working class people, poor people, middle class people get money, they spend it. They spend it on food, they spend it on rent, they spend it on school supplies. The money circulates in the community. So it's actually more productive and it's more locally productive. So if we do things like invest in local services in schools, nonprofits, and the safety net, that's putting money in the people of folks who will spend it, and that's putting services in the communities that actually need it. Higher wages, right? The state can take action. We got a kind of measly minimum wage increase last year that didn't get folks anywhere near out of poverty. Speaker Silver is working this year on the assembly side to try to accelerate that increase now to get it to $9 on January 1st. And then we're working with the new mayor de Blasio, with Melissa Mark Viverito, the city council speaker, to try to pass a law in Albany that would give cities and counties the ability to set a higher minimum wage than the statewide wage, right? So if you want to work full-time in New York to get out of poverty, you should be earning between $15 and $16. If you earn less than $15, $16 an hour, you are going to be living in poverty. Even as a single individual, I'm not even talking about families, right? So families, are patching together 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 jobs between a household, teenagers are paying rent, right? Everything that's happening is partially because of what I showed you, those low wages, the only jobs are low wages. We got to do things to make low wage job better. Some of that is union organizing, fast food workers and car wash workers, people that work in the increase. But part of it could be government saying, New York City could set its own minimum wage. New York City could set a $15 minimum wage, right? In Erie County, in Buffalo, you gotta earn $13.13, right? So there's a lot of lawmakers and activists up in Buffalo that say, give us the power, we think we can do this locally, we can get 1313 because, it grows the economy. Right? People have more than paychecks, people buy more things. We gave a subsidy to Walmart last year that runs about $100 million a year. We're actually giving subsidies to companies that employ teenage workers at minimum wage. So big box, fast food, Walmart, Wendy's, they're the ones that are getting literally taxpayer subsidies to pay the minimum wage and went up last year. That was a scam deal with the Senate Republicans. They got $600,000 in campaign contributions, and all of a sudden there's this special tax break that Walmart's gonna get $36 million a year, right? So, pretty easy to get rid of that one. Corporate welfare. There is a, let's get one, yeah, more jobs, there we go. Part of this investment is actually doing things that will create jobs, like if you give money to rich people, they may, invest in China and Brazil and Russia and India, and I'm all for more productivity everywhere in the world, but if your concern is about jobs and economic growth in New York, you don't necessarily just give money to rich people. If you rebuild roads and bridges, if you rebuild the transit system at a faster schedule than we're currently planning, if you build affordable housing like de Blasio and even Jeff Klein want to do now, right? If you do things to expand our clean energy retrofits and reduce the use of power, reduce greenhouse gases, increase solar, distribute, New Jersey is kicking our ass in a lot of these things. They do a lot of things in Jersey in the trades, in solar and renewables. Republican governor is investing more in this stuff than Democrat Andy Cuomo. So these are things that will create more jobs. It's government policy. They could take the action in Albany. It would make things better. Corporate welfare. So we have a bill called the Jobs Act this year that would add transparency and accountability for the $7 billion we spend on corporate welfare. It's very simple. It's a two-point plan. You can live with a two-point plan, right? The first thing is you put all the subsidies online and make them public so everybody can see them, right? If any company gets a subsidy, you should be able to go to a computer, look on, and see what the subsidy is, and if they promised to create any jobs for it, right? Some of these companies get money and they don't even make any hard promises. Many of the deals, the company will take the money, not create the jobs, and never have to get the money. So the second point of the two-point plan is a money-back guarantee for taxpayers. You don't create the jobs, you give back the money, period. No deals will ever be done ever again in New York where if you don't create a job, there's no way for taxpayers to get the money. New York is still losing hundreds of millions of dollars from the deals that Giuliani did when he was on his way out. Now, right? Some of those deals run to 2020. But Giuliani was like, we had 3 times the Bloomberg, and now we're in de Blasio, right? We are still paying triple-digit millions for those deals because the deals had no way to get the money back. A lot of them were with the banks. So the banks are cutting jobs, and we're subsidizing the banks, and we're cutting the schools, and we have homeless people we can't house. We have hungry people we can't feed. So the Jobs Act can help with that. Education is a huge issue. There is a huge division between the funding that goes to low-income districts, high-income districts. We are actually providing more state money to richer areas for their schools that are like college than we are to low-income areas that have a tough time getting kids up and reading and in grade level and adjusted and moving forward, right? So the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit was a way to get New York on track with that stuff. Spitzer did it for a year, and then boom, nothing since then. So we have this roadmap that says, here's how you get more equitable funding for your schools. Here's how you get the resources that you need for your communities. And we went 1 year along the map, and then we just said, sorry. Well, we kept giving those tax breaks to the corporations. We kept giving the money to the rich people. If we take the money that we have, if you took half the corporate welfare, $3.5 billion, and you took the tax cuts for the rich, even say, put a billion to property tax and renters, you'd have $4.5 billion every year to spend on things like infrastructure, clean energy, local schools, affordable college. That would specifically create more jobs in communities of color. The more we plow back into public services, the more we invest in youth of color, the more we take specific steps to support small businesses in targeted ways. All of those things will address the disparities in economic impact that we felt in recent years. Government needs to do this, and it's been doing it in fits and starts, but never strong, never effective, never with serious money behind it. and with a mayor that is potentially committed to it, and a governor that's up for re-election, it's a year when you might think something will be happening. It's not happening right now, and it needs to happen if we're gonna address income inequality clearly. UPK-NYC, if you pay attention to state politics and the fights between de Blasio and Cuomo, this is a thing. You know, de Blasio wants to provide early education for all 4-year-olds everywhere in New York City, paid for by a tax on people making more than $500,000 a year. Most of those people are millionaires, right? They have more than $1 million in the bank, their income goes up and down. They are, you know, the wealthiest New Yorkers. And the cost of the tax is about a like Starbucks latte a day, right? It's about like $2, $2.25 a day. So there are millionaires for the millionaires tax. De Blasio has stood up at a press conference with a lot of these rich guys, and they're saying, we will pay a latte a day to do this for kids all over New York City. It became a fight when the first time that Cuomo mentioned inequality the whole year so far was when he said that de Blasio's plan would like help New York City kids, but it wouldn't help Buffalo kids or Rochester kids. And that was just like a flat out, you know, con game. That was like, the fact is that de Blasio's plan taxes New York City millionaires to pay for 40% of the state's kids who would be in pre-K. So New York City pays for New York City, and Cuomo has a plan where he's like, I don't want to tax millionaires. I just want to give a bunch of money. He's given us, you know, about 1/10 of what it would actually cost to do it. He has no real plan to roll it out. And his money would go a lot further for the rest of the state. Buffalo and Rochester kids would actually get more if you did de Blasio's plan and Cuomo's plan, right? So if you pass UPK-NYC, if you support what de Blasio is doing, if our lawmakers said we need to do this and we need to do it in the shared budget, then kids in New York City and kids all over the state would get an early education. And, you know, early education is ridiculous. I mean, it's, whoa, sorry about that. The Federal Reserve says that you should classify early education programs as economic development. That you get $12 in return for every $1 you put in, right? We spend all this money on corporate welfare and we get all those low-wage jobs. The Federal Reserve has crunched the numbers and said for every $1 you invest in early education, the state gets $12 in benefits back. It's one of the best investments anyone can make. Oklahoma, which is run by rock-ribbed Republicans, has universal pre-K, right? So, you know, Jersey has, you know, Chris Christie has a better on-ramp for getting universal pre-K than Andrew Cuomo has right now. Support the dream. You know, working with immigrant communities and immigrant youth is an important part of this, making sure that college education is affordable for everybody, increasing proportion of young people who are ready to go to college, who have great grades and good test scores. Kids can't get in, and this is not about like you go ahead of you, right? It's not, like, you've seen all the flack about the prison college and everything, right? We have enough money to get affordable, low-cost, high-quality higher education for everybody. This is the richest, you know, society on earth, right? We're the most unequal, but the money is there, right? So with fair taxes and the right investments, we can support all young people that need to go to college, all people that need to go back to college to get skills. We got community college, we got SUNY and CUNY, all those need strong funding, and supporting the DREAM Act for immigrant youth is part of that initiative. Poverty and hunger and homelessness. Now, you know, when we have, there was a time, on that milk carton, we had a picture of the young Andrew Cuomo, right? When Andrew Cuomo was younger, he built housing for the homeless, right? Mm-hmm. He expanded affordable housing programs. He, like, you know, married a Kennedy, and it was like, you know, something in his, like, DNA was like, you know, man of the people, right? That one is missing, right? You know, it seems like a great opportunity, especially, even if he wants to be president, right? Everyone says, oh, he wants to be president. If you have all-time high record homelessness and child poverty in your state, do you deserve to be president? You did nothing about it but cut it by $1 billion? That does not make sense to me. And if you try to go to Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina and run for president, and there's people like us saying, wait a minute, that guy let all this homelessness and poverty persist and did nothing about it, I don't think it's a good way to move forward. And I think that, you know, the time is right to do this, the money is there, You gotta stop cutting, you gotta start investing, we gotta turn around. And strengthen democracy, you know, there have been some, you know, scandals in Albany, more and more people getting arrested, more and more bags of cash and campaign contributions flying around. And I know there are different perspectives as to a solution for that. Our coalition includes some groups that don't support the public financing effort. Our coalition includes some folks that do support the public financing effort. The one detail I will say about when they did public financing in Connecticut, they not only elected more working class people, people of color, and women to their legislature, but they also cut their federal felony conviction rate among legislators in half. So it's one thing you can do to reduce the number of elected officials that go to federal prison. All of this adds up to building stronger communities, right? If you're investing in infrastructure, you're investing in local resources like parks and roads and bridges, water and sewer systems, you're growing middle-class jobs, you're investing in people, you're helping those in need, you're helping make sure that communities have good schools and a better quality of life. That is different than the Tale of Two Cities. That is building stronger communities, and that's what you can do if you want to address inequality. So it's one of those years, and we're going to talk more about it as we go forward, and Darius leads us through the rest of this, but you know, every legislator in both houses and Cuomo counts. There's no one that should get a pass, right? Everybody, you've got assembly members, you've got state senators, you work in networks and organizations that reach out to these people. This is a year when everybody matters. You've got to call the Democrats that are in power, you've got to call the Democrats that are not in power. You've got to get your groups, your unions to jump in and stop the Cuomo tax breaks for the rich and put the middle class over millionaires, right? Let's do something that rebuilds communities instead of more trickle down that benefits the very wealthy. This is on the whiteboard here too. You can call toll free. We could get out the phones now. I love it when they, you know, we could say, you know, you have 35 new messages, right? They need to hear that in a year like this. So we could do that. The text thing is not going to get you a lot of text spam, but if you want to keep it up, there'll be a time when we're like, okay, the assembly is talking about their budget tomorrow. Every assembly member needs to get calls today to say the assembly budget cannot include these tax cuts for the rich. There's going to be points in the campaign when jumping in would be smart, and that's when we text you. We're not going to text you on Saturday night when that's going on and we want you to read some spam. So if you could jump in, that would be good. This is
talking about the budget on Sunday.
yeah. So that's the end of this piece.